afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final match in the octafinals for the Public Sector Debate Competition. I'm Aniki Clark, Communication Lead in the TIU and your host for this match. Now, I did say it's a final match in this round because already 6 places have been confirmed. We have a match going on next door and this match. So from these 2 matches, we will have the final 8 teams that would advance to the quarterfinals. We're really happy to have you join us, Beat, on social media or here at Saxthorpe. If you missed the matches in the previous rounds, you can always catch up on our social media pages. And today we have continuing the action. The Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining as the proponents, and the Jamaica Information Service as the opponents. And they will be debating the MOOT, be it resolved that the passage of time does not absolve societies of their moral duty to address historical injustices. Loaded, right? And I'm sure the arguments are loaded on both sides. Awesome, awesome. Well, let's get to meet the team. We will now invite Team Proposition, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicolay Beckford.
Good afternoon. My name is Andre Vogel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Shalika Darby.
Thank you so much, Team Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. And we now invite Team GIS to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Monique Whitfield, first speaker of the opposition.
Afternoon, Warren Bertram, second speaker.
Good afternoon, I'm Jodianne Clark, third speaker.
Thank you so much, Team GIS. And at this point, I will now invite the judges to introduce themselves.
Pleasant afternoon, everyone. My name is Javon Downey, and I'll serve as the chair adjudicator for this match.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kenisha Nelson, and I'll be a wing adjudicator for this match.
Good afternoon. I'm Curtis Wallace, and I'm the other wing adjudicator.
Thank you so much, judges. We are in for an exciting match, I'm sure. And at this point, I will now hand over to the chair adjudicator to marshal the match. Good luck, teams.
Thank you very much, Aniki. At this point in the game, all the teams are already familiar with the rules, but just to briefly recap, you're allotted their respective speaking times of 7, 6, and 5 minutes respectively. The first and last minute is protected time, which will be indicated by the ding of a bell. When you have completed your allotted time, the bell will ding twice to indicate that you're out of time, and then you'll get a further 15 seconds to wrap up, after which we will ding the bell repeatedly to signal that you are to yield the floor. We'll have 2 periods of cross-examination, and we'll discuss further when we get there. So without further ado, let's get this debate underway with the submission from the first proposition speaker. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, adjudicators and fellow debaters, today we're here to engage in a very pivotal discussion. A discussion where, by the end, you will see why time should not be used as a vehicle to flee the moral duty of addressing historical injustices. As such, the topic of discourse today is, be it resolved that the passage of time does not absolve societies of their moral duty to address historical injustices. To move this discussion forward, allow me to define some key terms in the motion. Absolve, to release from blame, sin, punishment, obligation, or responsibilities according to the Collins Dictionary. Societies, a large group of people who will live together in an organized way, making decisions about how to do things and sharing the work that needs to be done. Moral duty refers to the obligations that individuals have to act in ways that are considered right or just, often grounded in ethical principles or theories. Address, to give attention to or deal with a matter or problem according to the Cambridge Dictionary. Historical injustices, past moral wrongs committed by previous generations that continue to have lasting effect on present-day individuals or communities. These injustices often involve systemic discrimination, colonialization, slavery, and other forms of oppression. With these terms clearly defined, the motion before us is really saying that the passage of time does not free groups of individuals who have committed past moral wrongs that continue to impact society today from dealing with these issues. Now, why this is important? It is important because true justice demands action, not just from those who originally created the problem, but from the institutions, governments, and societies that have inherited both the legacy of harm and the power to correct it. With that out of the way, let me briefly outline the principles that the proposition will be arguing. As first speaker, I will demonstrate the very nature of injustices, in that their effects ripple across generations, leaving scars that persist long after the initial harm has been inflicted and continue to shape the present world, requires to be addressed, acknowledged, and addressed by society. Secondly, I will establish that accountability is not solely a legal obligation, but a moral imperative, a principle upon which any just society must be built. My second speaker will further develop our stance by explaining that persistent harm leads to a persistent moral duty and outline the benefits of addressing past injustices. Our third speaker will then bring the curtains close by reinforcing our core philosophy and making clear why we have triumphant in this debate. Mr. Speaker, imagine your child being raped, experiencing a crime so heinous, so traumatic, that it fundamentally alters their life, and years later, when they seek justice, they are told because several years have passed and they are now an adult, there is no need for anything to be done about it. Sounds ridiculous, right? This is the world that the opposition is in favor of, but it is a world that we cannot support. The passage of time does not erase the psychological, social, or economic impacts of historical injustices. Trauma lingers, shaping lives in ways that cannot simply be dismissed. With the earlier reference to rape, Mr. Speaker, it can have psychological impacts that significantly impede the quality of life of the affected person and their descendants. This is one aspect of the harm it causes. Moving further up the scale, Mr. Speaker, we are all familiar with one of the gravest historical injustices, slavery. Despite slavery having officially ended decades ago, its consequences are still being felt to this day. Though legally abolished, its destructive legacy is woven into the very fabric of modern society. Black communities continue to grapple with systemic disparities in wealth, education, employment, and social standing, all of which are direct consequences of the system designed to oppress. Why do I say this? Slavery did not merely strip people of their freedom, it institutionalized inequality. Consequently, it fosters a society where one racial group disproportionately benefits while another struggles against barriers deliberately placed in their way. In essence, it has facilitated an us versus them climate, fueling hatred between two groups of people. The discrimination is so entrenched that the very color of our skin could get you shot on sight by the very people institutioned to serve and protect. Hence, this problem requires a collective response from society. It will require our government and institutions who have the power to issue reparations, formal apologies, and enact policy changes. It requires the citizens to acknowledge past wrongs, educate themselves, advocate for change, and spread messages of love and unity. However, the opposition would have us believe that time passing eliminates responsibility. But the truth is that it is an ongoing societal commitment rather than something that expires over time. Instrumental to this debate is the understanding that for us to have a just society, it must be built on values of fairness, equity, and reparation. It involves understanding that legal systems can, in fact, fail to address certain wrongs due to omission or evolution as laws do change. Imperatively, however, morality is a constant that provides a mechanism to address legal technicalities. Morality is a constant that provides the mechanism to address legal technicalities not at this time, in that society recognizes more responsibility even when laws do not, coupled with the fact that legal accountability may expire, but ethical responsibility does not. In closing, you would have heard from side proposition that injustices have lasting consequences, echoing through generations, shaping economies, social hierarchies, and lived experiences of affected communities. You would have heard that accountability is not merely a legal requirement, but a moral imperative that ensures societies uphold fairness, equity, reparations when the law falls short. Our stance is built on the principles of justice, responsibility, and humanity itself. We have demonstrated beyond doubt that the passage of time does not and must not absolve society of their moral duty to address historical injustices. On the other hand, our opposition would have us believe that as time moves forward, responsibility fades. But justice does not operate on a timeline. It remains relevant as long as harm persists, as long as disparities continue, and as long as those impacted are denied the dignity and restitution that they deserve. The proposition pauses.
We thank the first proposition speaker for opening the debate fiercely on that side of the House. And now we welcome to do the same the first opposition speaker. Hear, hear.
Adjudicators, audience, worthy opponents, good afternoon. The proposition wants us to believe that the passage of time does not absolve societies of their moral duty to address historical injustices. But they have not proven to us beyond a reasonable doubt why this generation should feel guilty or obligated to address the injustices of the past. That is because perpetuation of addressing past wrongs for generations to come is a complicated process. It's futile. Why? Because a moral duty is difficult to define. It's subjective, complex, and morality changes from generation to generation. This according to historian David Hume. This is an emotional topic, my opponents, but let us be sober about it for a minute and very objective and define the key terms, because otherwise we'll be left to draw the wrong conclusion. To absolve means to declare someone free from guilt, obligation, or punishment. This according to the Oxford Dictionary. Moral duty is a duty that a person feels they should do based on their own conscience. And finally, we want to challenge the definition provided by the proposition about historical injustice, because according to the Oxford Dictionary, historical injustice refers to theories that can claim that past wrongs may have implications for current distribution. The opposition then restates the MOOT to read, "Be it resolved that the passage of time frees societies of feeling guilt and obligation to address past wrongs." My opponents, we are not here to discredit that our ancestors have suffered some amount of unjust acts. What we are here to discuss is the practicality for societies to bear the burden of guilt or obligation to address historical injustices. As the first speaker, I will look at slavery and how members of today's society are trying to address it, and then shift our focus to the real issue at hand, the present. My second speaker will prove to you why it is unrealistic for the current generation to be punished or feel guilty to address historical wrongs. Mr. Speaker, let us take a look at slavery. Bitter act? Indeed. An injustice today? Absolutely. An injustice then? No. Why? Because our societal morals have shifted. Time changes things. Time changes morals. It means then that time has absolved this society of feeling guilty to address historical injustices. Not accepted. Your first speaker mentioned that the lasting legacies of slavery still exist today, and it's important for us to seek reparations. But what exactly are you claiming that slavery has left on our society today? You've mentioned systematic disparities in wealth, in our education system, dysfunctional families, and may I add, some proponents mention underdeveloped infrastructure, and they say that this is all caused by slavery. Well then, my opponents, are we too preoccupied with past injustices and are ignoring the current dire, pressing social needs that blatantly stares us in the face for us to fix? How exactly will seeking reparations and an apology fix the reality of these issues that our society is currently facing? Let's zoom in on a few countries that have received reparations or an apology and examine what this has really done to address the legacies you have claimed to be faced with today. First, let us look at Grenada. On February 27, 2023, members of the Trevelyan family delivered a public apology and £100,000 to begin righting the wrongs of their ancestors. The money was used to establish an education fund for the UWI Open campus. Great. And applause is necessary. But did this apology rehabilitate their society? No. Let us take it home. According to the Jamaica Gleaner in August 2024, descendants of Clan Malcolm of Argyle involved in chattel slavery apologized to the people of Jamaica. What exactly happened beyond that? Or infrastructure was magically fixed because of this apology? Or dysfunctional families were miraculously healed?
Point of information.
Not accepted. Absolutely not. While symbolic, these acts have not significantly transformed the deep-rooted issues our society still face. Mr. Speaker, the opposition posits that this has done nothing to rehabilitate our society. We should then shift our focus to repairing our society. On May 15, 2025, listen to this, my opponents, Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness stated that he will not wait on reparations. He stated, and I quote, "I believe I have the independence to act in my own interest, to use whatever little resources I have so that my children won't suffer. That is what it means, my people, to be independent. I believe in what makes sense, what works, and what is practical," end quote. There you have it, my opponents. What's practical? To use the time we have to continue building on our independence by using the resources we have to make our future better. Former Prime Minister Michael Manley once stated, "Let us not be prisoners of the past, but pioneers of the future." Most recently, in January 2025, former US President Joe Biden pardoned our beloved hero Marcus Garvey. This changed nothing in our daily lives. Instead, I think we should strive to live by his principle. Marcus Garvey's teachings focused on emphasizing Black nationalism, race pride, as you mentioned, my opponents, self-reliance, and the need for unity among African people globally. My opponents, this is what our current society should have a moral duty to do, to work on ourselves and our country, to unite, to be economically independent and build strong institutions. One of his popular quotes states that we should emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because whilst others may free the body through the apology you may want, none but ourselves can free the mind, and that is what we should do. Mr. Speaker, the opposition stands resolute in stating that time has absolved this society of addressing historical injustices, but time has allowed us the opportunity to honor our ancestors by not feeling guilty forever, but by building stronger societies today for a stronger future. I thank you.
We thank the first proposition speaker for an equally spirited opening on that side of the House, and now we'll engage in our first period of cross-examination, where we'll allow opposition to pose 3 questions to propositions, questions limited at 10 seconds and responses capped at 20 seconds. Opposition, you're up.
My opponents, can you explain how our current society is currently suffering legacies of enslavement and native genocide, and how reparations can improve that?
Thank you for that question. First of all, this is not a moot about reparations, while it is a part of the discussion, but essentially, we have to note that the present generations that are currently in Jamaica, alive in Jamaica, are actually those who have suffered from slavery. They're the generations who have actually been on the receiving end of a lot of moral and social injustices, and so they're the ones who really have to be liberated. Your interpretation of the moot is faulty because you're suggesting that that generation should be feeling guilty for seeking for that matter that was done against them to be addressed.
My opponents, your first speaker mentioned reparations, hence why we're tackling that. But we want to know, my opponents, how exactly will these issues be fixed today?
Well, to answer that, I really do want to go back to the MOOT. And our position speaks to the fact that the passage of time does not absolve the responsibility of the party who did the injuring. It does not absolve their responsibility to address it. You are saying that it should not be addressed to reparations. Well, let's say it's not reparations, but it should be addressed. Perhaps returning the lands that were not afforded to previously enslaved people when they got emancipation. Perhaps many other types of solutions to address the core of the problem caused by the injustice.
Final question, opposition.
My opponents, how do you measure then the length of time that we should take to address these injustices that you so claim lingers today?
I love that question because the passage and the length of time is inconsequential. That is our perspective. What matters is the persistence of the harm that is generated by the injustice and the fact that the benefit is still being felt by the perpetrator. Because by pursuing that injustice, they would have gotten potentially income when it comes on to slavery. They would have gotten economic power and legacy when it comes on to what the Holocaust was trying to accomplish.
We thank opposition for their questions, and now we'll entertain the questions from side proposition.
Thank you. And first question for the first speaker, you would have indicated that based on your interpretation of the MOOT, again, the addressing of injustices is really an act of guilt on the part, even for this generation. How do you explain that particular perspective when, as I've indicated, our generation is the one who have suffered? Sorry.
My opponents, I think you are confused today. We are debating that time absolves, and the definition of absolves means to feel guilty or obligated. Hence, we're debating that this generation should not feel guilty or obligated to address those issues.
I'm so sorry, but I have to challenge your challenge to our definition. From our perspective, absolve is to release from blame, punishment, sin, or obligation. Are you really saying that to be absolved of historical injustices means to no longer feel guilty?
Time. All right. Just before we continue, teams, remember, just get straight into the questions. Okay. It's 10 seconds, and also you don't need to consistently press the microphone once it's on, just speak.
My opponents, you have pretty much selected the wrong definition, but according to the Oxford Dictionary, absolve means to feel guilty, to be free from guilt, to be free from obligation, free from punishment. And that is why we are here today, to say that we should not be continuously feeling guilty or obligated to address those past issues. We should be focusing on the issues here today to fix it so that our generation may not suffer further injustice.
Final question from proposition.
The question being posed to team opposition is essentially this. How is it that a generation that has suffered the injustices that's requiring the matter to be addressed is going to be made to feel guilty? They're the ones who need the support. They're the ones who will be benefiting. You misunderstand the MOOT.
No, my opponents, we were not clearly born in slavery unless we are reincarnated. But today, the generations, we've moved past that. Morals have changed. We're talking about historical injustices, not injustices of today, my opponents. So you need to get it together before your second speaker comes, because you're in problems.
We thank both teams for a very interesting first period of cross-examination, and now we will continue the debate with the submission from the second proposition speaker. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the opposition, my very own team members and the audience. Mr. Speaker, judges, good morning. Good afternoon. Before I get into my speech, I really do need to refute something that I think is critical to the opposition's argument, which is the fact that to absolve is simply to no longer feel guilty. When the reality is, to be absolved of a moral duty means that you no longer have that moral duty. Means that the MOOT is saying, with the passage of time, you are relinquished of your part in repairing the wrong that you caused. It does not mean that you no longer feel guilty. And further, when she brings up examples of Joe Biden's pardon and an apology that was delivered in Grenada, this does not address injustice. What this does is identifies it. It says to the audience that, okay, we will say that this has happened, but to address something is to repair it, is to put things in place to ensure that it will not happen again and that the negative implications of the initial occurrence is completely addressed. Our first speaker showed that the passage of time does not absolve moral duty. I will, having rebutted the core of their arguments, now tell you the benefits of addressing the sins of the past. I will speak to social stability, expanded markets, unlocked innovation, and enhanced global reputation. First and foremost, addressing a historic injustice lowers the likelihood of reoccurrence. It also reduces future policing and welfare costs by removing the resentment that fuels crimes and social unrest. When West Germany publicly acknowledged its role in the Holocaust and paid compensation, extremist street violence declined and police budgets eased. Where redress is absent, as in parts of the Caribbean, such as specifically Haiti, periodic unrests still flare, and Britain spends millions of dollars on aids to security and for missions of aid. Because justice is cheaper than perpetual containment, the passage of time cannot excuse inaction. Delay only multiplies tomorrow's bill. What about expanding markets? When you compensate, you inject spending power into formerly exploited communities, turning them into a new and growing consumer for the benefiting society's goods and services. German machinery delivered to Israel under the 1952 Reparations Pact helped push Israeli growth from about 2 to 17% in only 2 years. German exporters gained in a booming new client. What am I saying? I'm saying that the perpetrating party, when they enact actions to address, to deal with, to actually solve the moral problem that they had created, it benefits the country that they had wronged and the people that they are wronged, and it turns around and benefits them as well. That is what happened for Germany. What about unlocking innovation? When restitution is provided, it gives talented people the security and resources they need to innovate, to release human creativity, and that drives wider economic growth. After compensation programs took effect, and forgive me for focusing solely on the Holocaust, but I think we've elaborated fully on slavery as a moral injustice. And we are not talking solely about reparations from slavery. We are talking about societies dealing with the issues that they would have caused in the past. Continuing, not at this time. After compensation programs took place, the children of Holocaust survivors flooded universities and laboratories. American patent data shows that affected fields produced roughly 1/3 more inventions. Caribbean students who often emigrate or stagnate because schools lack fundings, scholarships and research grants funded through redress would let that dormant ingenuity flourish. And we see that every day. As the British attempt to to repair the issues that they have done from the past through the scholarships, through the mentorship, through the opportunities that they provide. It allows Jamaicans, such as the very Marcus Garvey, to flourish as they go overseas and come back home and release the benefits onto our wider society. But finally, I will touch on the last benefit, which is an enhanced global reputation. By openly confronting the wrongs of the past, you elevate the nation's international standing, attracting investors and allies who prefer partners that keep their moral commitment. If a country believes that you can do them a moral wrong, and then you just wait on time to pass, and it is absolved, while your harm persists, and while the perpetrating party's benefit continues into the future, then why would you want to do business with them? Why would you engage with them? How do you trust them? Mr. Speaker, this moot is clear. The passage of time does not absolve the duty to address past injustices. The opposition pauses.
We thank the second proposition speaker for his submissions to this debate, and now we will entertain the submissions from the second opposition speaker. Hear, hear.
Judges, my opponents, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The speaker before me, the second speaker from the proposition, painted a nice picture of what the possibilities are without little, like global reputation, all these other unlocked things. But I put it to him that what says addressing those issues leads to that benefit. Also, this back and forth about the absolution, we are not saying that this society should not feel guilt. We are saying past societies we should not feel guilt for past societies' actions. But I will delve deep and you will see the point we are trying to make. My team, the opposition, remains resolute. The passage of time frees societies of feeling guilt and obligation to address the absence of justices in the past. And here is why. This generation should not be obligated to or feel guilty for addressing historical injustice they did not commit. Acknowledging history is necessary, but guilt should not be inherited. Putting the emotional or financial responsibility on people simply because of their lineage is not justice. What it is misdirected accountability.
Point of information.
Accepted.
We are not putting the responsibility on them because of their lineage, but because they benefited from the moral injustice that was perpetuated.
But we're talking about present societies, not the past societies. But I will continue. As philosopher Bernard Williams explains in his book, moral responsibility must be tied to an individual agency. When we force guilt on those who had no role in past injustices, we move into the realm of moral overreach. And that is when the urge to correct history ends up demanding unfair sacrifices from innocent people today. Instead of shame, we should be building awareness. Instead of death, we should be looking for ways of empowerment. Blaming people for injustices they did not commit does nothing to heal the past and only distracts from the urgent needs of the present. No. My opponents and others may argue that past societies should be held to today's standards. But we must remember that morals can change over time. What was considered right back then is often seen as wrong today. A society, philosopher McIntyre argues that a society develops its moral code based on its context, its knowledge, its challenges, and its beliefs at that time. In the 1960s, it was legal to advertise cigarettes on TV, even during children's cartoons. Today, public health campaigns ban smoking in airplanes, hospitals, and even open spaces. A century ago, child marriages were common in many cultures. Today, we fight to outlaw them globally. So, should we condemn the past with the same lens we view the present? No. We must understand it, learn from it, and look to the future with this new understanding. Justice is not about retroactive guilt. It's about proactive growth. The reason morality changes is because people change. If we don't, we can turn into what we see with the Hamas-Israel conflict, rooted in historical grievances about land, colonial history, and religious differences. Each side claims historical injustice. Each side sees the other as the enemy and the responsible for the respective injustice. I ask you, though, what has this caused? Violence, generations of children growing up in fear, poverty, filled with hatred. History is being used as a justification for violence, while only the present suffers. This is an example of the danger that comes when turning historical justice into a permanent moral obligation. It can lock societies into vengeance, tribalism, and blame, instead of moving forward with empathy, compromise, and peace. History is not a courtroom. It is a classroom where morality is one of the most evolving subjects. Now, let's look at restitution. People would call for compensation, apologies, land returns, and other forms of, let's say, apologies in regard to past injustices. But I put it to you, how do we measure the value of stolen opportunities? What is the dollar figure for generations lost by displacement? How much is the cost of erasing someone's culture? Restitution may sound just, but when it requires harming innocent people today to compensate for crimes of the past, we must ask ourselves, is that justice or just revenge dressed like virtue? Holocaust survivors, German paid reparations to them. That exercise was only able because the victims were still alive and the state acknowledged specific crimes and made payments using legal frameworks. Other injustices do not have that luxury. Too much time has passed and we can't address them because society has changed, so the laws have changed. In demanding reparations for wounds that can't be undone, we must demand investment in solutions that can prevent the next great injustice. Let us stop looking backwards in anger and start focusing forward with intention. Let's stop asking people to pay for the past, but direct them to invest past. It needs to carry the tools to build a better tomorrow. Thank you.
We thank the second proposition speaker for his submissions, and at this point we will enter the second and final period of cross-examination, where once again opposition will field 3 questions to proposition and then we'll flip the arrangement. Opposition.
Your second speaker mentioned that this generation should address the injustices that they or we have created, but you also mentioned the Holocaust. What exactly is the historical injustice that you're speaking about?
I think you misunderstood our points. We brought up the Holocaust as an example of an injustice that was perpetuated by a society that is not absolved with time, and that Germany themselves, as the society that had perpetuated the injustice, also did what they needed to do to address the injustice. Jamaica did not perpetuate any injustices. Our current population does not have to worry about trying to absolve ourselves of past sins because we did not.
Question.
Okay. Do you think it financially prudent to spend funds and time seeking atonement for historical injustices rather than spending the money on problems that we need to fix today?
I'll give you a 2-pronged answer to that. First and foremost, our position on this MOOT is on the principle of the matter. The principle of the matter is that time in and of itself does not absolve you of your moral duty. The second component of my answer is the fact that it does not have to be a costly endeavor, because I believe that endeavor should come from the perpetuating party. You are assuming that we will need to spend all this money to get the restitution that we deserve. That is an assumption. And it does not conflict with our position on the principle that societies are not absolved of their duty just because some time has passed.
Okay, it's not an assumption.
Final question.
It's not an assumption. The budget for the Reparation Commission is 26 million. But how do you address, how does addressing historical injustices lead to meaningful reduction in long-term issues such as racism and colorism?
I'll give you one example. So in Rwanda, for example, the Hutus and Tutsis have been through a significant process of reconciliation and social reconciliation and justice. That is the kind of transitioning that comes through addressing historical injustices. And that's the kind of society that we want to build, especially if there are any such matters that pertain to us as Jamaicans.
Thank you for your questions, opposition, and now we'll entertain the questions from side proposition.
Can you name a single instance where ignoring a historical grievance made it disappear?
My opponents, it's not that we are ignoring, we understand that it happened, but China, for example, they have moved on from the historical injustices that they have faced, but they are focusing on the issues that currently exist, and that is what they are correcting, and that is why they have a strong society today.
Is it unreasonable to consider that addressing the wrongs actually elevates the social consciousness of the society, which improves our ability to set laws that reduce the likelihood of wrongs being perpetuated in the future?
I guess in a perfect world society, that argument could be made, but not because something is addressed mean that change will come. Change comes from the persons involved.
I agree with you that, I'm so sorry, this is questioning.
It's okay.
Do you believe that societies that benefit from wealth and other advantages that come as a result of moral injustices such as murder or exploitation, that the societies that benefit also bear a part of that burden?
So individuals or societies that benefit, they did not choose to benefit from it. For example, the descendants of slave owners, for example, they did not choose that benefit. They were born into it, yes? So punishing them for that type of redistribution is not feasible. It is not fair. It is not practical.
We thank both teams for engaging us in this period of cross-examination. At this point, the debate will transition into a 1-minute pause to allow for the finishing touches to be put on the reply speeches, and we will proceed with the response from the opposition reply speaker to close out the debate on that side. That 1 minute begins now. And that brings that 1 minute pause to an end. We will now have the submission from the opposition reply speaker to close out the debate on that side of the house. Hear, hear.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker,
judges, my opponents, and audience. The proposition has not been able to prove that addressing historical injustices will soothe a society's contemporary sorrows. And we are insisting that the current woes must take priority. The first speaker, according to the first speaker, justice can be blind to time. This is not so. Our very laws have statutes of limitations for some crimes. Attempting to apply today's moral standards to long past wrongs or injustices is ethically flawed. Morality is not constant, as you mentioned. It is not constant. There are different eras where people lived by different moral codes. The second speaker says Mr. Biden's pardon of their hero is not a form of address. And I can't understand why, because addressing injustices means apologizing as well. It includes apologizing. So it includes acknowledgement and apology, sorry. Also, giving the country a good global standing doesn't have anything to do with receiving redress from a country that has done wrong, or a society that has done wrong. It has more to do with our crime rate, our economy, or international relations and prospects for foreign investments. Now picture this. A house burned down 150 years ago. It was caused by some people who lit a fire deliberately. It was no accident. The people who lived there, they lost everything. A terrible tragedy. So the people responsible are now long gone. It's 150 years ago. And so are the victims. Today, some descendants of the victims live on that land in a completely new house, though, built by different hands some time ago. Now imagine asking the descendants of the arsonists to pay for repairs on the current house that's on the land, asking them to fix the roof, to fix the doors and the windows, people who were never alive when the fire took place. Is that justice? Is that justice? Or is it a new kind of injustice? My team has made it clear. Societies evolve, and with that evolution comes a shift in moral, a shift in what is considered right and wrong, and a shift in our priorities. Perhaps in a perfect world, moral duty would be timeless. It sounds good and noble. But in the real world, there is no space for moral absolutism. That's the philosophical view, that certain actions are wrong or right regardless of the context. Mr. Speaker, we say while we should always remember and learn from the past, moral responsibility is tied to context and connection. And the passage of time, my friends, dilutes both of these. Therefore, trying to retroactively correct historical wrongs can lead to misguided, unfair policies that harm people today, people who are not the perpetrators, thereby creating new injustices instead of healing the old ones. If societies are bound by all past injustices, where exactly do we draw the line? Do we demand reparations for crimes hundreds, even thousands of years ago? Why stop there? Affected societies should demand redress from the pillaging and the aggressive raids of the Vikings. This logic is infinite. Do you see? It's not practical at all, which is why it has not been adopted in international law. There are recommendations, however, there's no law supporting this. The proposition hasn't addressed the practicality of what they are proposing. Mr. Speaker, we ask, is it moral to punish people for something they did not do? Shouldn't we rather focus on building a just and equitable society today? The reality is, present generations did not commit historical injustices. That is the raw fact. While they may have inherited the outcomes, responsibility must be proportionate. Otherwise, where exactly is the justice? Justice is not about punishing or demanding redress from the descendants of wrongdoers. Mr. Speaker, societies that are victim to historical injustices should not forget. They may pardon, but more importantly, what they must do is move forward. Let us judge the current generation by their character, no, and not by their heritage. We urge you to oppose this motion. The opposition rests.
We thank the opposition reply speaker for a beautiful conclusion to the arguments on that side of the House. And now to do the same, we welcome the proposition reply speaker to close the debate in totality. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, Honorable House, good afternoon. I must first address one of the additional erroneous points made by the opposition team. They indicated that there's no international law governing the matter of reparations or even of restitution or reconciliation or addressing past historical wrongs. I point you to the UN Basic Principles on Right to a Remedy and Reparation, which indicate that these matters require restitution regardless of when the violation occurred, confirming that time does not annul duty. The proposition team has made its point clear. It has also appealed to the conscience of a reasonable man and has made the point that time does not simply absolve parties or simply absolve societies of remedying, of addressing historical wrongs. I want to first point you to the matter that injustices that take place in one generation perpetuate disadvantages throughout future generations. Where time has passed, it does not mean that you cease to suffer. It does not mean that the society is no longer being able to consider or even suffering, rather, from the things that would have been done in the past. For example, you mentioned that there are infrastructural projects that you'd like to focus on. The very fact that the individuals who would have perpetuated the injustice are leaps and bounds ahead is a clear indication of the injury and also of the fact that you now have to be playing catch up to get back to where that country has gone as a result of exploiting you. My second speaker would have made the point clear that time does not absolve a man who has committed murder from actually facing the consequence of his actions. Time does not absolve a man who has committed rape or any other kind of injustice from remedying that particular wrong. But yet the opposition wants us to live in a world where you simply blink, watch the clock, and allow for these particular kinds of crimes and worse crimes that would have been committed against specific groups to go away. I want to further make the point that we tend to fail to acknowledge that moral shifts do not happen by chance. Moral shifts occur as a result of addressing injustices. There are several societal laws that we have today that are the result of addressing historical wrongs. Our third speaker on the opposition side has the privilege of indicating that the passage of time does not mean that we are able to forget. I want to remind the opposition team that your ability to not forget is a privilege afforded to you by all the others who would have made it clear that these matters must be addressed. Mr. Speaker, I point you to a very important example of the importance of addressing these matters. A recent example and an ongoing example, rather. In Rwanda, currently and ongoing, there is an active work to restore, reconcile the Hutus and the Tutsis. You may recall that the Hutus and the Tutsis had one of the major genocides of our era, and they're not discussing reparations, as the opposition would like to confine you to consider. They are discussing social reconciliation. They are discussing peace-building activities that help both of these groups to come back together. They are discussing and implementing specific measures that bring forth the fruit of reconciliation. That is the direct result. That's a very present and important result that we need to keep in mind when we consider the importance of addressing past historical wrongs. Finally, I'll bring you to an at-home example. We had great mentions, of course, of our Prime Minister. I want to bring you back to a Jamaican example. Recently, in 2017, I point you to an article, Jamaican government issues apology, reparations for the 1963 brutal attack on Rastas. We all remember the chant, bringing all Rastas dead and alive, or alive. We recall the opposition speech that time passes and no, these wrongs are no longer wrong. She is telling the Prime Minister and also the group of Rastafarians upon which our cultural society has benefited, that their issues have passed, time has gone, there's no need to right that wrong. I point you to these examples as I conclude with the points made by my first two speakers. Time passing does not mean all wounds simply disappear. Time passing does not mean the injury and the loss of economic advantage simply disappears. There is a moral responsibility in today's society, through governments, through all different types of persons in society who have the capacity to do so, to address and remedy moral wrongs that continue to plague our society. And again, this will help us to form a society going forward that would not be constrained by the recurrence of these awful and unjust activities. Thank you.
We thank the proposition reply speaker for closing the debate in totality.
Well, let's hear it for the teams one more time. Does the passage of time absolve societies of their moral duty to address historical injustices? That was the hotly contested MOOT by the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries as the proponent and the Jamaica Information Service as the opponent. Who will win? We will know in a few minutes as the judges go to deliberate, and we want to know from our audience online, what do you think? Should they be absolved or not? We'll find out in a short while when the judges return to announce the winner of the match as well as the best speaker. For those of you online, stay tuned. We'll be back in about 20 minutes or so. That should be good. All right, well done, teams. Feel well that you've done your best. And we will hear the results in a few. Bye for now. Yeah.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We just witnessed an interesting debate under the motion, MOOT rather, be it resolved that the passage of time does not absolve societies of their moral duties to address historical injustices. In proposition, we have the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, and in opposition, we had the Jamaica Information Service. An interesting debate unfolded before our eyes. So let's get straight into the analysis of the debate. So first thing that we want to point out was that there was clearly a clash of definition and contextualization. Based on the definitions that were put forward, it was apparent to us as a panel of adjudicators that there were certain limitations in how the debate was contextualized and framed. We believe, though, that the proposition offered a more reasonable definition. Notwithstanding this, we still think a reasonable and engaging debate transpired, even with this difference in how the debate was framed and how the debate was contextualized. So what were the major areas or points on which this debate turned? Firstly, we had this clash of time. In propositions world, we get this idea that because of certain injustices, certain disadvantages and certain inequalities are institutionalized and they are passed down from generation to generation, right? That's how they characterized it. They said time has passed, but the issues that came with the historical injustices were transcended from generation to generation and sort of inherited. On opposition's rather side of the house, we get that it is kind of difficult to manage this process of holding somebody accountable because, again, there is this passage of time, and they told us that if we are to engage with this kind of ideology or engage with this kind of mentality, then it can become something that is indefinite because there are always been historical injustices. Do we go back as far as holding the Vikings accountable for their kind of social historical injustices? So that was an interesting idea that was argued equally on both sides. How do we address this issue in regards to time? And next key area in which the debate turned was this idea of shifting in morals. Opposition argues that it is actually problematic to hold the current or contemporary societies accountable because morals shift and morals change. What was maybe immoral in one generation or in one era can now be deemed moral in another era. That was what opposition contended. We get a sort of response to that from proposition when they argued that morals do not change or morals do not shift in a vacuum. Morals shift when they are addressed. So when something is perceived as a problem and we come together and we address it, that is what dictates whether a shift occurs. If the consensus is that this is good, then the morals will shift to accept it as good. And likewise, if it is if it is in the consensus as bad, then the morals will shift to reflect same. One of the next key clash that came out in the debate was this argument of the benefits of engendering this philosophical idea as opposed to the harms that we get when we engage this idea. Opposition tells us that this is harmful because, one, it perpetuates injustices against present generations. So we are seeking to solve certain injustices while we are perpetuating injustices against the current generation that, quite frankly, did not have anything to do with the injustices that we are debating about. They also said that in doing so, it creates some new kind of injustices that are impacting current generations. They said that it leads to misguided policies and it perpetuates violence. And they gave us the idea with Israel and Hamas, and they're saying that this war is perpetuating and still happening now because of these historical injustices, and they can't come to any consensus about who was the perpetrator, and these kind of issues persist and it perpetuates violence. However, to those arguments, we get an analysis and side proposition to say there are benefits to be derived from engendering such ideas. And they tell us that in addressing these concerns, we get benefits such as it reduces the likelihood of reoccurrence, right? And they told us about the decline in police, the need for police presence in West Germany when they started to kind of address certain historical injustices. They told us that it expands markets and there are some economical benefits to be derived because proposition was saying that we need to focus on our current and the infrastructure, and they claim that the infrastructure is the way it is now because of, again, these same historical injustices. And when we get these kind of reparations and other forms of redress, we can address these inequalities and be caught up with the perpetrators because they are already ahead of us based on certain economic exploitation. They told us about some benefits and innovation, and they gave us this idea that not only do the recipients, which are the victims, benefit, but it also benefits the perpetrators because it kind of polishes off their reputation and then attracts directors to them. As a panel of adjudicators, when we weighed all of these arguments, we think that the team that came out victorious on 279 points and the team in second place, just right behind, on 270 points, is the team in proposition. Proposition. Yes. The best speaker from the debate, this person advanced the most substantive argumentation, also from the winning team, Mr. Andre Bogle. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Aniki.
Thank you so much, Chair Adjudicate. I don't know why it was so muted when the winner was announced. Usually we're accustomed to a little cheer, you know, and some excitement. Okay, but congratulations. You are indeed the proponents and the winner of the match. And well tried, the GIS. As you know, for those of you who have been following the competition, this is a knockout round. So the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries will advance to the quarterfinals. And sadly, we say farewell to GIS at the end of the octafinals. So we've had 2 days of exciting debate. And the next time we converge in this space, it will be the quarterfinals, where the top 8 will become 4 for the quarterfinals. It's been lovely having you here at Saxthorpe and those of you who've joined us online. See you in 2 weeks.